Hello, welcome to Revenant Reads. I'm Vin, and this is the monthly wrap up for December of 2024. All right, so I have a pile here of books, and these are all the books that I read in December of 2024. All of these books, I have videos that are dedicated to discussing them further. I have a series of videos called Fresh Read Kills. That's where I talk about the books that I've recently finished reading. So if you want more thoughts on any of these books, you can go to those. This is really just going to be a brief summary. And yeah, let's just get started. So one of the things that I read, I guess I'll start with some of these. I had last year created a new booktube event for the holiday season, and it's called Ghosts of Christmas Past. And it was the purpose of it was to sort of recapture and reinvent for a modern age the Victorian tradition of reading ghost stories around Christmas time. So that's really what it was all about, was let's read some ghost stories, some short stories. We did have a group read of Elizabeth Gaskell's The Old Nurse's Story. So that was an option if you wanted to participate. You could also read other Victorian ghost stories, or you can read like more modern ghost stories. It was really more about just the act of reading ghost stories around Christmas time. So I read the first 100 pages at least of this. I didn't get through all of it. So I read, let's see, there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 stories. This is an Oxford anthology of Victorian ghost stories. They are in chronological order. So really I read from the stories from the 1850s to the 1860s. And they were fun. The two highlights were definitely The Old Nurse's Story from Gaskell. And the other one that I really liked was the second story in here, An Account of Some Strange Disturbances in Ongier Street by J.S. Lefanu. I really liked that one a lot. And the other ones were entertaining, but not necessarily must-reads. This is something that when we do Ghost of Christmas Past again at the end of this year, I'll definitely read more of. I'll read another 100 pages or so. With that event as well, I did a reread of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, which I had not read in probably about 20 years or so. The first time I read it, I remember, kind of liking it, but I wasn't used to Victorian writing at that point. I've definitely been much more, I've acclimated to it a lot more, and I've grown to appreciate it and like it a lot more. So this time around, I was very much charmed by this book, and I thought that his depiction of ghosts were actually really kind of cool. And then I also did another tradition with my family this year called, it's in Icelandic, I think it's Yule Book Flood. I don't really know how to say it in Icelandic. It's something like Yule Book of Flood or something like that. I'm sure I butchered it. But the whole idea in Iceland is for Christmas Eve, you gift, everybody's gifted a new book, and then they spend the rest of the evening just reading it in like a cozy atmosphere. And so we did that with our family. We did it a few days before Christmas Eve, but I got books for, my 8-year-old daughter, my 12-year-old son, and for my wife. And I ended up reading a couple of them as well, the things that I got. So this is one I got for my wife. This was Susanna Clarke, The Wood at Midwinter, which it's really a short story that they have put into book form. And we have illustrations along the way. And it was nice. I mean, it had lots of whimsy. We have this girl who's kind of very much in tune with nature and connected with the animals, and she almost becomes like a mother of the wood throughout the story. But it was interesting. Did I think it really needed its own book? No, not really. It probably should have been an anthology, but it had enough charm, and it was very, very quick to read. And I didn't regret buying it all. My wife liked it. I also got for my son this. This was Scary Book of Christmas Lore. Forget about Jingle Bells and Jolly Old St. Nick, 50 terrifying Yuletide tales from around the world. So these aren't really tales. This is more like an encyclopedia of, short 2-page entries on various winter creatures. So we've got La Befana, like the Christmas witch from Italy. Let's see, of course you got Krampus in here, right? You got Frau Parsta, the belly slitter. These were fun. This was a nice quick read as well. I think in my review I'd said that there were some typographic errors. I was kind of surprised by how how many of those I found, even though it was a fairly short book. And it doesn't go in depth, but it is a nice jumping off point for, basically further exploration. Okay, I did read some books for Historathon. Historathon 2024. Historathon is a year-long reading event. We are currently in Historathon 2025 right now, but it is an event which celebrates and encourages people to read nonfiction history. We divide the year up into quarters, each quarter being 3 months long, and each quarter looking at a different time period. So basically, to participate, you would read a book that looked at that time period. So quarter 4, the last 3 months of the year, look at the years 1820 to the present. And I read some books on 20th century history. So the first ones I read in December was this one, Stephen Ambrose's Band of Brothers. I really do love the miniseries Band of Brothers. I watched it just twice actually this past year, and I knew that I really needed to read the book. And I was surprised by how closely the book, I should say how closely the series stuck to the book. It's very, very well done. And I thought this was a good read. Definitely, it's swift, it's entertaining. You're just astounded by what these guys went through. And it's very much a glorifying look at these guys, but what they did was pretty incredible. But yeah, I'm really glad I read this. I enjoyed it a lot. And to get what was happening on the other side of Europe, in front of the Nazis, I read this. Svetlana Alexievich's The Unwomanly Face of War, an oral history of women in World War II. Looks like it won the Nobel Prize in Literature. So this was actually really, really good and harrowing at times. This was a gift from a friend that I had gotten last Christmas. And this was originally written in Russian in the 1980s. The author had gone around interviewing women who had participated in World War II, so basically for the Soviet Union. Some of them were frontline combat, some of them were laundresses, nurses, whatever it might be. And she basically, as an oral history, she got all their experiences down. And it's really fascinating. You see interesting things about the gender dynamics. At the first part of the book, you're getting a lot of the kind of very similar stories from these women, which is to be expected. Then by the second half of the book, there's some really memorable and harrowing stories, which was pretty powerful stuff. But yeah, I enjoyed this quite a bit. I'm really glad that I read it. And as a buddy read, with John David, one of my co-hosts for Historathon, we both read Liberalism in Dark Times, The Liberal Ethos in the 20th Century by Joshua Cherniss. And this one I was a little bit more lukewarm on as far as a read. I really like the mission behind it. It essentially looked at how does liberalism survive illiberalism, especially an illiberalism which is committed to violence and intolerance. And he talks about something which he calls tempered liberalism, which is sort of something that is liberalism that can be strong enough to stand up to evil without becoming the evil that it hates. And he looks at this sort of liberal ethos through the writings of about half a dozen intellectual writers in the mid-20th century, people who are mostly writing around the Cold War era. And I think a lot of that is interesting. I'm definitely a supporter of the mission here. My problem is I found the writing to be kind of dry and sort of repetitive. And I wish that there was just a little more context, a little more history, a little more politics and action, instead of it being almost entirely political theory. I don't mind political theory, but I like it coupled with political action. That's just me. But so yeah, I'm glad I read it. Really interesting, but if this is something that you would want to read, you would have to know what you were walking into. I also read a book that was sitting on my shelves for a very long time. First Freedom First, A Citizen's Guide to Protecting Religious Liberty and the Separation of Church and State, by Reverend Welton Gaddy and Reverend Barry Lynn. And this was written in the, really towards the end of the Bush administration, Bush Jr. So that's really where a lot of, especially the first half, concentrates on. But I really like the second half of the book, which was all about a legal perspective, where it looked at the various, Supreme Court cases, the jurisdiction, the legal precedent for things like separation of church and state, how it's been established, how it's gone down to the states, what are the important cases that have established where we are at this point, or at least as we were about almost 20 years ago. I would definitely like to get a book that had more updated information, but I did find it very instructive, especially looking at it from a historical lens. They did a good job of outlining that. And finally, the last thing that I read in December was Bruce McBain's Roman Games, a Plinius Secundus mystery. This is a historical fiction mystery set in the year 96 under the Emperor Domitian. And Pliny is appointed by the emperor, he's a young senator and lawyer, to solving a murder crime. A prominent Roman politician who had been murdered, trying to figure out what happened. And I wouldn't say that the mystery itself is really the strongest point here. I really like the depiction of Rome, and also, in particular, I liked the exploration of the various religions that were, kind of vying for attention during that time. Christianity and Judaism were kind of bit players, but you especially have, your regular Roman religion, on display, but you also had the growing cult of Isis that was spreading in popularity, and that all comes into play throughout the story. So yeah, I ended up enjoying this overall. Once again, it's Bruce McBain's Roman Games. So those are the books that I read in December of 2024. Quick recap again. We've got Roman Games, First Freedom First, Liberalism in Dark Times, The Unwomanly Face of War, Band of Brothers, Scary Book of Christmas Lore, The Wood at Midwinter, Christmas Carol, and at least I read part of Victorian Christmas stories. So if you've read any of these, love to hear your thoughts. And as always, thank you, BookTube.